So the first console I had as a kid was the Game Boy Color. I had Pokemon Yellow on it, and then I had Micro Machines, like it was a twin pack. I wanted a Nintendo 64 and never got one. Instead, I got the PlayStation 1. Now, in a way, that was kind of a blessing in disguise. I mean, I would eventually get the Nintendo 64 anyway, but I got to experience a few interesting games from playing on PlayStation, but there were a few stinkers. Now, I grew up with the PlayStation 1, and I will say, in retrospect, it hasn't aged the best. It hasn't. Some games have aged well, some games have not. It was a weird transition period, was 5th gen in general, where games were still trying to figure out how to do 3D right, and camera angles and all of that. And some of the games, because of that, haven't aged well. But some of the games I still have fond memories for, and I still have nostalgia for, and some of the games have aged well, and I want to talk about those as well. Now, the very first game I got on the PlayStation 1 was Tarzan. Tarzan was basically a platformer. You basically jump around over pits, and you throw fruit at enemies to kill them. And you could get like a knife or a spear at some points, and like you could use them to fight enemies as well. And yeah, like I remember having a lot of trouble with that because it was my first real platformer. Yeah, I didn't actually grow up with platformers until that. I don't have the game anymore, but I did have it back in the day, and yeah. I remember it ended with a fight between Tarzan and Clayton, and I kind of remember the music from that game in my head. It's still in the back of my head. I remember it. I always remember the Stampede section where you have to avoid the elephants and stuff. It's kind of reminiscent of like the Pepsi Man sections, which is another PlayStation 1 game where you have to avoid the giant can of Pepsi chasing you. Similar to that. That was my first PlayStation 1 game. It's aged better than most. I mean, it's a side-scrolling platformer, but I'm just not really into platformers, and that was not the platformer that really got me interested in the genre anyway, so I sold it. I just didn't really have much attachment to it. Now, obviously, because I was a kid, the main source of games that I had, the main source of gaming I had as a kid, because I didn't have many games, was through demo discs. Now, I would get gaming magazines, which was like the PlayStation official magazine in the UK, and they would come with these demo discs which had demos of lots of different games, and I used to play those demo discs all the time. Like, I used to play Tekken 3, which let you play as Eddie Gordo in the demo disc, if I remember, and yeah, like, I now have a copy of Tekken 3, and it was my first introduction to fighting games, which, yeah, I'm not a big fan of fighting games nowadays, but back then I could see them as, like, dumb fun, and it encouraged me to buy the game, and I ended up getting the game, and yeah, I lost all my data for Tekken 3 because all of my data was on an old memory card that got corrupted, unfortunately, so I can't really play that same file, but I still have the game. Another game I played on the demo disc was Worms Armageddon. The Worms games are always interesting to me. They're kind of unique in a way because they're kind of a tactical game. It's similar to playing golf, but you're actually shooting things, so it's like you have to deal with like the wind and stuff, and like you have to aim whilst also dealing with wind and all that, which is interesting. And I always liked how silly it is, and how you have lots of different like sounds for all the worms and stuff, and also how customizable they are. I had a lot of fun playing Worms Armageddon, and eventually I would purchase a copy of Worms World Party for the PlayStation 1, which had fort mode, which was really cool because you got like one fort for the other team and one fort for your team, and you could infiltrate their fort and stuff, which I thought was a fun concept. And there's been other Worms games since. And then Sega got involved in Worms and they ruined it, which is one of the reasons why I kind of have a negative affinity towards Sega, because ever since they were the publisher for Worms, Worms went downhill. And I knew that with like Worms 3D and Worms Forts, they just completely changed the original format and just made it not as good. And yeah, like, obviously they didn't develop it, but it was just like, because they were the publisher, it's kind of like they greenlit this shit. And I wasn't a fan. Eventually, like, they would go elsewhere. Like, I think they went with Microsoft at one point. I don't remember fully, but they did release one on Xbox, which I played back in the day as well. And yeah, like, they do all sorts now. There's loads of different Worms games now. Some are good, some are terrible, so yeah. And then we're going to talk about the very first. And when I say first, I'm not going to count Pokemon. Pokemon was technically my first role-playing game experience. It was my first JRPG experience. But Pokemon is Pokemon. We all experienced Pokemon back then. If you grew up in the 90s, you played Pokemon. It's that simple. Unless you were living in a third world country or something, you played Pokemon. You found a way. So obviously I played that because I had a Game Boy Color, but my first experience playing a JRPG was a demo disc for The Legend of Dragoon. Now, The Legend of Dragoon is a game that I now own and I have beaten, and boy is it a long one. It's a long game, and I have a lot of nostalgia for that game because of how great the world building is and stuff, and like, the music's decent. It does a lot of things right. I just think that the combat hasn't aged the best, and it's got a few issues, but it does have some good aspects to it. I think the best aspects is in its world and the aesthetics. I still think that if I was to pick the most definitive JRPG on the PlayStation 1, The Legend of Dragoon would be it. I actually would say that The Legend of Dragoon is better than all of the Final Fantasy games on the PlayStation 1, including the second JRPG I owned, which was also on PlayStation 1, which was Final Fantasy 7. I actually recently had to go back and get save data back from Final Fantasy 7 not long ago, because I lost my progress on it, but I still had a save file from when I was back in Midgar. I lost my beaten save file, but I had another save where I was basically in Midgard on disc 2, and that part of the game I had a lot of trouble with as a kid, but going back to it now, I just absolutely destroyed the boss, and I was like, how did I have so much trouble with this? You know what I mean? It's one of those weird things. But as a kid I was dumb, I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I had trouble with all the bosses in like disc 1 as well near the end. The Demon War boss, that boss was a nightmare. And there were a lot of stopping points in that game. I think the best memory of Final Fantasy VII specifically was leaving Midgar, because you go from this metropolis, which is just an urban metropolis, it's just a wasteland, and you're just kind of like going from place to place, you know, like your typical kind of game. You just go from one place to the next, you know. It's a bit like Pokemon, how you just go from one place to the next, you know what I mean? And, you know, you're just in the city and it's very urban, and it's just like, you just think, okay, this is the game, this is clearly what we're going to spend all of this game in. We're just spending all of this game in this huge metropolis and stuff. You know, you go through some cool things, and eventually you get to the part where you're actually facing off against the villain, and that kind of leads into another section where you essentially get to the end of this highway, and after that, you find yourself exiting Midgar. And when I was a kid, I was absolutely in awe, because when you leave Midgar, suddenly the world map is there. Now, I've never seen a world map in a video game, because I grew up with Pokemon. Like, Pokemon doesn't technically have the same sort of thing. You just go from area to area, which is what Midgar was like. So Midgar was kind of like going from area to area, and I was like, oh, it's just like Pokemon. It's just all like, just like, you just go from one area to the next when you go through transition zones, you know what I mean? And that's not the case in Final Fantasy VII, because it introduced me to the world map. And when I found the world map, the overworld, which there isn't an overworld in Pokemon, I was in awe. I was really in awe. It was amazing, and the music definitely helped sell it. It's that feeling of freedom from a confinement. I think when you're a kid, you feel very confined. You feel like, you know, you don't have much freedom, because obviously you have to stick around with your parents all the time. So when I was presented with this huge world and got to roam around freely, like, I was giddy as a kid. Like, it was amazing. You gotta remember, this is before open worlds, guys, so yeah, like, it was an amazing feeling. Then Disc 2 happened, and they changed the world map theme, and it just wasn't as good. Disc 2, at the time I wasn't bothered about it, because back when I was a kid, JRPGs were just like, it was a saga, it was an adventure, you were absorbed into it, you know? You just felt like it was just a constant thing. You felt more deeply connected with it. Whereas as an adult, you just kind of like, it's just a video game, you know what I mean? And yeah, like, looking back on it, Disc 1 is the best part. Disc 2 is where things just go downhill, in my opinion. In retrospect, that's definitely where the game suffers the most. I find that the plot just kind of like, it just stops, and then you just get into this whole other subplot, which just kind of like segues in to like what happens at the end of Disc 2, which it just happens all at once, and it's just like, there's no real clear structure to it. It's just kind of a mess. Like, I'm just not a fan of Disc 2 at all. And then Disc 3 is like the finale, which everybody knows about. And don't lie, you've played Final Fantasy VII, you should know about it. If you haven't played Final Fantasy VII, wow, you are one of the few people that hasn't. Congratulations. I mean, there's a remake now, so, you know, it's obvious what happens. I'm not going to spoil it anyways. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII and The Legend of Dragoon were introduced to me on the PlayStation 1, and they were JRPGs, so they introduced me to the genre that I played a lot of games on, and yeah, those two games are very important for that reason. They're not my favourite JRPGs, but they are the ones that introduced me to JRPGs, alongside Pokemon. And there were some other games that I played as a kid on PlayStation 1. The first one being Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro. Now, I've never really been much of a Marvel or comic book fan, but I have a lot of nostalgia for this game just simply because I played it as a kid. It's just one of those things, you know what I mean? The game hasn't aged brilliantly. I did review the game quite a while back and mentioned a lot of my issues with it, mainly with the camera and a lot of other things, like just how it just kind of has random delays when you... It felt random sometimes, because there's a section of the game where you have to fight these samurai armors, and obviously the best way to fight them is to kind of like do the jump kick into like a punch combo, but sometimes when you do the jump kick there's like a delay because there's recovery time, but sometimes there isn't, which is weird. But yeah, like, the game isn't really the best. The camera's a bit messy. It has a few problems, but I do still have nostalgia for it because, you know, I remember a lot of the scenes and, like, the Shocker fight and, of course, the Electro fight, you know, like, they're just so memorable to me because they're just, like, I remember, like, the second level you get to, like, play basketball and like shoot a basketball into the hoops and that lot, which is interesting. And yeah, so as I said, those are the main games, and there's one more game, which this is basically the game that got me into wrestling, and it's the first experience of wrestling I ever had, and that was WWF SmackDown. I didn't know what WWF was because I live in England. I don't know what the hell WWF is because it wasn't really a thing that aired in England very much. It was an American thing. I mean, if you were up in like the late hours at night, you'd probably catch it if you had cable, but we didn't have cable, so I didn't know what WWF was. My first reaction was, am I even allowed to play this? Because it was, let's put it this way, it was very edgy, and edgy is usually like, when you see edgy stuff, as a kid who was sheltered from a lot of the edgy stuff because I wasn't allowed to play all of that, it was kind of like, wow, am I allowed to play this? Anyways, I did play it, and yeah, you got to pick, like, play Stone Cold and beat up The Rock. So yeah, that's kind of what you got to do in the demo. And yeah, like, I have memories with that as well, and eventually it's kind of what got me into wrestling as well, so yeah, which is kind of interesting. So that's mainly my childhood with the PlayStation 1. I did play other games, like the main highlights on the PlayStation 1 for me. I mean, I'll give a shout out to The Legend Dragoon. I think that is still a highlight, even if it has its problems. But the main highlights for me are Star Ocean the Second Story and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Those two games are the PlayStation 1 at its best, and I think a lot of that's because they didn't really focus in on trying to deal with like the whole 3D thing. They just focused in on the pre-rendered backgrounds and like the sprites and stuff, and they've aged well because of it. So yeah, I definitely think those are the two best games on it. Now, another game I did play when I was younger but I didn't own, a friend had it, was Hot Wheels Turbo Racing. I own that game now, and it's another game that I have a lot of nostalgia for. It's also on Nintendo 64 as well, but I played it on the PlayStation 1, and the PlayStation 1 has more tracks, so yeah, definitely another game that I enjoyed on the PlayStation 1. So yeah, that's basically my history with the PlayStation 1.